Hello everyone, this is Dr. Darkness, and today we've got the very first Doctor Who video on this channel. This is something I've been looking forward to doing videos about for quite a while, and this seems like the most obvious place to start. This is my ranking of my top 12 Doctors from Doctor Who. As a bit of housekeeping, I'm only counting the main numbered 12 Doctors, so no John Hurt, no Peter Cushing, and no Jodie Whittaker because I can't make an accurate comparison based on 2 words in about 20 seconds. And I'm only going to count the first version of any Doctor, so Richard Hurndall and David Bradley, their versions of the first Doctor in particular do not count. As a bit of information here, I have watched every episode of both the classic series and the new series of Doctor Who, but I'm not counting Big Finish towards the standings in this because I've only dipped into it a bit and I've heard a little bit of all of the Doctors on there, but not enough to really validly put it in the comparison. Also, as a final note, I will be talking freely about any spoilers about any of the eras of this Doctor, so just be aware of that. But without any further ado, let's get started. In number 12, we have the 6th Doctor, played by Colin Baker. I didn't really want to put him here because I do like him quite a lot more than most people seem to, but if I'm honest with myself, I think in terms of writing, this is certainly the most flawed version of the Doctor, and I like all of the Doctors to some extent, so I didn't really have much of a choice but to put Colin Baker in last. His Doctor was arrogant, standoffish, eccentric, and occasionally theatrical, which are qualities that all of the Doctors have, but the 6th Doctor added in being completely unlikable into that, especially early on, and he did start to progress a little bit, but he just didn't have the time to. And I think a part of it's probably the fact that his outfit is just such an eyesore that it doesn't really help when you're trying to warm to a character. He does certainly have some great moments.
You killed Perry?
And there are definitely signs that he could have been a great Doctor, as the limited amount I've heard on Big Finish has proven. But overall I just think his portrayal on the show was not subtle enough, and he wasn't really given the time for his Doctor to grow. So it's fairly conclusive. Colin Baker gets onto my list at number 12. In number 11, the 5th Doctor, played by Peter Davison. Now he had to be fairly low on here because he is a fairly inoffensive Doctor. He's not really got anything that makes you go, oh, I don't like him. But at the same time, he doesn't really have any big defining characteristics. He's probably the least exceptional Doctor, and that's just what makes him come so low on this list for me. The costume, his attitude, even his supporting cast is just a little bit less inspired than most of the other Doctors. In terms of distinguishing characteristics for him, he likes cricket, I suppose. I think it's unfortunate though, a little bit like with Colin. He could have been really good. His best performance, by far, was in the Caves of Androzani.
Hands in the air over here! Why? Because I'll kill you if you don't! Not a very persuasive argument, actually, Stubbs, because I'm going to die soon anyway! Unless, of course, I give it to a count of 3! Unless, of course, I can find the antidote! I owe it to my friend to try because I got her into this! So you see, I'm not going to let you stop me now!
And I think it's a great shame that he wasn't able to maybe have another series to build on that performance. But I suppose the Caves of Androzani wouldn't have worked quite so well if he'd continued being the Doctor after, so Peter Davison gets onto my list at number 11. And in number 10 we have another one that I feel almost bad for putting quite so low, and that is the 1st Doctor, played by William Hartnell. William Hartnell is so important to Doctor Who. He is such a big part of why the show became as big as it did. He's the only person who was ever just the Doctor, and he made the role his own. But at the same time, there were quite a lot of elements of the character that have become so popular that wouldn't really come into place until later incarnations. He's a bit more morally ambiguous than most of the others. You're not really quite sure whether he's on your side or not. But I think he did grow softer, and he does have some genuinely warm moments.
Believe me, my dear, your future lies with David, and not with a silly old buffer like me. One day, I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, There must be no regrets, no tears, no anxieties. Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine.
That one in particular. He's the frailest of the Doctors, and it means that his wisdom is really the defining characteristic here. That's the thing that allows him to get the best of most of his enemies. And I like that in his future appearances in the Three Doctors and then the other version of the First Doctor in the Five Doctors, while the others would often bicker with each other, they always held a bit of respect for the First Doctor. He did as good a job as he possibly could have done, but the show and the Doctor would progress a lot further on, so William Hartnell gets onto the list at number 10. And in number 9 we've got someone who's done fairly well actually, considering how little he actually appears in the show, and that's Paul McGann. His main appearance of course was in the TV movie that was not very good, but he was the one shining light of that film. He was the only one there who really seemed to know what the show was about. He brought so much energy into the role, while still being quite funny and alien, despite the whole half-human thing that we can pretend didn't happen. And I think that was just proven in The Night of the Doctor, where he had a bit better writing, better stuff to work with, and it's unfortunate that all we saw of him on screen, not counting audio because he's obviously been in that quite a lot, but on screen all we've really seen of him was the very start and the very end of his life. From the handful of stories I've heard, he is really good, but because largely of his small number of appearances, Paul McGann gets onto my list at number 9. And in number 8 we have the last classic Doctor, that is the 7th Doctor as played by Sylvester McCoy. Now, his first series was not very good at all. He was a bit of a clown here, and it didn't really work as well as some of the other Doctors that tried to go down that route. I think it was in the second two series, the season 25 and 26, that he really did become an exciting and interesting Doctor. He was almost an anti-hero. He was manipulating people. He was willing to kill people and hurt people to achieve his goals.
Do you think I would let you have control of the Hand of Omega?
Do not do this, I beg of you!
Nothing can stop it now!
Have pity on me!
I have pity for you.
15!
Bye, Davros. It hasn't been pleasant.
Ace, I think, is the perfect companion for him. As a younger woman who is willing to stand up for herself, but at the same time kind of understands that the Doctor is far more wise than she is, I wish that the show hadn't been cancelled when it was, and that he'd been able to have a few more series to really cement his place as the anti-hero Doctor. He's definitely one of the more interesting Doctors, but he's let down by his first season, and his story feels almost incomplete, and I just tend not to enjoy his performance quite as much as some of the others. So, Sylvester McCoy gets onto my list at number 8. Now in number 7, we have a very popular Doctor, the 10th Doctor, as played by David Tennant. Now it's sort of difficult for me to really summarise my feelings about the 10th Doctor, which is probably why he ends up somewhere in the middle. He's definitely one of the most entertaining Doctors, and I can see why people love him for that. I think he plays the role of an action hero with a bit of humour really well, especially when he's bouncing off Catherine Tate. I think she was just perfect for him. And the highlight of both his era and his Doctor is definitely within Series 4 when he's with Donna. I think that was just great. The problems come outside of Series 4, especially in Series 3 when he's just ignoring Martha because he misses Rose. He's lost so many companions at this point. Why is he just neglecting the new one because he misses the old one? I didn't like that at all. But worst of all, the last year and a half, after he'd announced his regeneration, before he regenerated, it was a year and a half of him moping about the fact that he was going to regenerate for the 12th time, remember, at this point. He is a good Doctor, but there are things in here that just stop me from liking him as a character sometimes.
Oh really, just leave me. I'm an old man, Doctor. I've had my time.
Well, exactly, look at you. Not remotely important. But me? I could do so much more! So much more!
And that means his highs and his lows, they kind of even out in the middle. David Tennant gets onto my list at number 7. Right, in number 6, it's the second Doctor, as played by Patrick Troughton. And I think this was really when the Doctor became the Doctor, the one that we know. This is how he started acting as he would throughout the rest of the time of the show was going on. The first Doctor kind of was finding his feet, as the show was generally during his run, and I think this is just where the tropes of the Doctor established themselves. He's quite funny, he's quite bubbly, he's energetic, he's still extremely intelligent, he's arrogant at times. I think that Patrick Troughton is one of the best actors to play the Doctor, definitely. Every moment with him on the screen is a delight. It's a tragedy, really, that so few of his stories are incomplete, and that's probably part of the reason he's not even higher on the list. Because I've had to watch reconstructions and that sort of thing of so many of his episodes, it makes it hard to like him quite as much as, say, the other classic Doctors that are going to be above him, who have a lot more of their material, or all of their material available. He did the clown Doctor a lot more effectively than Sylvester McCoy, but I think he had some really nice warm moments too.
You'll find there's so much else to think about, to remember. Our lives are different to anybody else's. That's the exciting thing. Nobody in the universe can do what we're doing.
Patrick Troughton is a lot of the reason why the Doctor is the way he is, and while William Hartnell is hugely important for creating the show, or helping to create the Doctor in the first place, and making him so popular, I think Patrick Troughton is to thank for how the Doctor is. So he gets onto my list at number 6. In number 5 we have the first modern Doctor, the 9th Doctor, as played by Christopher Eccleston. He probably had the hardest job after the first and second Doctors to do. He had to bring the show back properly for the first time in 16 years. And I think he was so perfect for the role. His Doctor was different in a good way. He was scarred by his experiences in the Time War, which I think was a really nice thing to put in the gap between the classic era and the new era. And throughout the first series, he needs to be reminded how important he is, and how he actually is a good person, despite the fact he knows he's done this horrible thing. Rose, incidentally, I think works far better with this Doctor as a companion than she does with the 10th Doctor. He's a lot older and a bit stronger, and while she does seem to grow emotional and romantic feelings towards him, I think he's a bit more alienated from her. But on the whole, I liked how unpredictable the 9th Doctor could be. At times he could be quite funny, and he was just having a laugh and having a fun time going around the universe. At other times, he would react in a really bad way to stuff.
No, wait. Maybe we are. You're right, yeah, okay. You've got a point. Because I know what to do. I know what should happen. I know what you deserve. Exterminate.
And I think all of that made the genuinely warming moments that much more effective, because you knew how bad this Doctor had been affected by his experiences. While I wish he'd stayed longer, I think his story arc's so self-contained that it's quite nice, and it's one of the reasons Series 1 is still my favourite modern series. It just works so well together. It's quite a cohesive run for him as he slowly starts to appreciate he has a role in the universe, and he is a good person who's done something bad, but he's still got a place here. And that's why Christopher Eccleston gets onto my list at number 5. In number 4 we have the 11th Doctor, played by Matt Smith. This actually surprised me how high he was, because I remember not liking the show very much while he was there. But I think he was a nice antidote to what had happened with the Doctor before he'd become so obsessed with himself. And I think now we had a Doctor who just wanted to have a good time. It was a lot more easygoing. A little bit like Patrick Troughton's Doctor. He was a bit of a clown, but again had that warmer side to him, and I think that he still had a bit of the edge that the modern Doctors like to have a bit, and it was a nice balance that I liked seeing throughout his time as the Doctor. Honestly, there were times during his era, particularly during Series 6, I didn't like the show. I was just watching it because he was there. He kept me interested in Doctor Who, and that makes him very special to me as a Doctor, I suppose. As well as being fun, he was a doctor for speeches, remember. Sometimes they made it a bit too obvious, like, okay, we're setting up a speech now, but every time it was still great to watch.
No plan, no backup, no weapons worth a damn. Oh, and something else I don't have. Anything to lose. So, if you're sitting up there in your silly little spaceship with all your silly little guns, and you've got any plans on taking the Pandorica tonight, just remember who's standing in your way.
He's definitely one of the most entertaining Doctors. My top 3 is fairly cemented and has been for a little while. So for him to finish 4th is great for him. Matt Smith gets onto my list at number 4. Number 3, the 3rd Doctor, Jon Pertwee. He is the Doctor in one of my favourite eras of the show. I really like the 5 years that Jon Pertwee was the Doctor, but I do think he is a big part of it. He's a big part of what made the transition into the 70s, into colour and into the new format work so well. He's a bit more of an action hero than any of the other classic Doctors, but he still has the quirkiness and the charm that all of those have. He's helped by his supporting cast probably more than any of the others, but that's the way the show had been set up. This whole unit family thing was a really nice, different thing to do for the show. And I liked him, like, physically standing up to these soldiers. Sometimes they would do really bad things, and they were still his friends, but he would tell them that he thought what they'd done was bad. And I think another thing that really brought out the best in Jon Pertwee was Roger Delgado as the Master. I think he's still the best Master, and these two just worked off each other so well. It meant that even stories that maybe weren't so great, like The Time Monster, was still really fun to watch because you were seeing the two of them bouncing off each other. And that makes Jon Pertwee get onto my list at number 3. And in number 2, a little bit like Star Wars, it's the one that has been my favourite for most of my life, and has then just been picked to the post right at the end. And this is the 4th Doctor as played by Tom Baker. He embodied everything that makes the Doctor so great. He could be quite light-hearted at times, it was always fun to see him then, but he could also be quite intimidating if the situation required it. I think he's possibly one of the more alien Doctors, and that just made him that much more exciting to see. What I liked with the first 4 classic Doctors, it seemed like every one of them was building on what came before, and really, Tom Baker had a lot of what those Doctors had too. He had William Hartnell's kind of physical presence on screen, by which I mean like his commanding way that he would take charge of a room and that sort of thing. He had Patrick Troughton's sense of fun, and he was a little bit more action-y than the 260s Doctors had been, so that was a bit more like Jon Pertwee, and he added in this eccentricity that none of the other Doctors have really matched. He's obviously got the most iconic look as well, with the scarf in particular. It looked wacky and goofy in a way that wasn't trying too hard to be wacky and goofy like, say, Colin Baker's was. His voice as well, I think, is a big part of what makes him such a good Doctor. It has a sort of magical sense to it. It's hard to really fault him as the Doctor, apart from the fact that in his last series it seemed like he didn't really care that much and he was just phoning it in. But Tom Baker gets onto my list at number 2. Right, and in number 1 we have the most recent Doctor, Peter Capaldi, the 12th Doctor. As with Tom Baker, I think everything about him is just so perfect for the Doctor, and I could tell this like right from his first interview. The way he talks and the way he walks, the way he just like gestures when he's moving and talking, it feels so alien and yet so familiar at the same time, and that's the perfect balance that the Doctor should have. He has the magical sense to him, and I think again he's a really great actor, and it shines throughout his era, even in stories where maybe they're not quite as good. The fact that he'd been a fan of the show since the show had began, I think it just shines through how much passion he has for this show. The absolute highlight, of course, is in Heaven Sent, where it's just him on his own, and it's so brilliant.
Nearly 1 billion years.
And when the entire mountain is chiseled away, the first second of eternity will have passed!
And I think that's probably one of the best individual performances I've ever seen from a single actor. One thing I really liked about this Doctor was how flawed he was. I think particularly in the modern series they made the Doctor out to be perfect, almost. But this Doctor makes mistakes, and those mistakes have consequences. In particular, World Enough and Time, I think the second last episode of Series 10. The Doctor is too late to save Bill, and I think that was just a really powerful moment, and it makes you see the Doctor is not perfect. He makes mistakes. People around him get hurt. And on top of that, I think they allowed him to go through a proper arc. He grew warmer and softer as the show went on. He started off quite grumpy and standoffish, and then he developed into a bit more jovial character, a bit more of a fun character, especially in Series 10. And his final thoughts, I think, being, "be kind." Those were one of the last things he said before regenerating. And I think that just showed how far he'd come, and it just made him such a good Doctor throughout the time he was there, and I really wish he'd been able to stay longer, but Peter Capaldi gets onto my list at number 1. So that's it, that's my ranking for the top 12 Doctors in Doctor Who. Feel free to put your ranking in the comments section below the video. And while you're down there, please like this video if you did, and if you liked it, then check out my other videos and subscribe to this channel. And as always, thank you for watching.